Hello and welcome to this CIPS Futures mini-series, brought to you by the Chartered Institute of Procurement and Supply and partnered with Resolution. Hello and welcome to episode 2 of this CIPS Futures Navigating Supplier Disputes podcast mini-series. I'm James Moore, part of the editorial and content team here at CIPS, and I'm excited to be hosting episode 2. As a reminder, this is the second of 3 episodes where we're focusing on conflict resolution, exploring why disputes often happen in commercial relationships, how to manage them, and the increasing supporting role that technology is now providing procurement and supply professionals. Last episode, we uncovered some of the reasons behind supplier disputes. We spoke about how it's often due to misalignment between the two parties, and why the repercussions of a decision made by the likes of a government on one side of the world can often land at the feet of procurement in another and create unforeseen conflict with suppliers. And as we heard, it's very often procurement and supply professionals who are the first to be tasked with managing challenges when they arise. Today, we'll continue the discussion by uncovering some of the early warning signs to watch for to prevent future contractual disputes, as well as asking our guests what behaviours and soft skills are critical to resolving conflict with suppliers or even internal stakeholders. Thanks, of course, to our partners for this series, Resolution, the AI-native platform designed specifically for managing conflict and dispute resolution across supplier and commercial relationships. So let's get going. We're once again joined by CIPS trainer Kurt Warren. Welcome back, Kurt.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me.
Always good to have you back. And we're delighted to have Fayola-Maria Jack, CEO and founder of Resolution, with us as well for this episode. Before founding Resolution, Faye's background is in legal and disputes, with roles across the public and private sector, including for the likes of Lloyds Banking Group, the UK Cabinet Office in government, and also at the United Nations. So quite the CV there, Faye. But I don't know if I've missed anything, if you want to kind of introduce yourself properly and share a little bit about Resolution.
Absolutely. So I've been working in this space for a while, as you have mentioned. This is an area I'm particularly passionate about because just from my experience leading supply management teams, procurement functions, there is so much work that goes on in this space that I think has fallen under the radar, and it's important work. So it's managing relationships to get them from point A to point B, delivering what was expected and navigating those issues that crop up along that way. And we've seen so much in the media about the types of issues that people in this profession face into. COVID put a light on that. Now the tariffs are putting a light on that. But outside of these big kind of media events, it happens on a day-to-day basis. So Resolution was built to support businesses, to support procurement teams, supply management teams with the work that they do on a daily basis in conflict and disputes, and using AI to really support them to resolve things efficiently at pace, but also without the cost leakage that we often see. And then finally, to really support relationships because they are what matter. To make sure that you can deliver what was anticipated and that relationship lasts the time that it's supposed to.
Fantastic. Thank you. And yeah, I think you'll hear a little bit about supplier relationship management, negotiation, skills, that kind of thing across this episode as we kind of talk about managing and sort of skills and behaviors for managing conflicts and disputes today. We'll talk a little bit more about tech and AI episode 3, but we'll give a little tease at the end of this episode as well. So looking forward to it. But what traits or behaviors are important to good supplier relationship management in the first place that maybe might help avoid disputes later down the line?
The first thing to remember is that without suppliers, there is no supply chain. And we've entered into a contract. And that contract is a bit like a contract of marriage. There's going to be fallouts and everything else, but it's how we actually deal with it. And one of the biggest traits, and if we go through them really, the key thing is communication. Communication all the way through the whole process of the contract. Another trait is empathy. Businesses have problems and we go too quickly with regarding to the blame game. And as soon as we go to the blame game, people take it personal. And this is a business relationship. It's not a personal relationship. So one of the traits is making sure that they keep it with regarding to the business. The other thing is And a good supplier relationship manager needs to understand the business, because the relationship, relies so much on the relationship between the supplier and the business. They're the interface. Without suppliers, we haven't got a business. And we also can't shift our products. The other thing is understanding in the supplier relationship side, what is their roles and responsibilities by both parties? And if we have clear defined roles and responsibilities, we then don't have issues with regard into crossing over or misunderstanding or misalignment. And a lot of these, to really go back, is we just need to communicate. And communications by emails is great, but having a coffee and communicating voice to voice will solve a lot of these problems. And, that is the essence of what we do in CIPS. It's the interface between the business and the supplier and creating that level of trust, empathy, and mutual growth. And that's what we're in business for.
Yeah, really interesting. And I know you do a lot of work on sort of uplifting those skills and capabilities through lots of different methods at CIPS. And, in the episode description, we'll put a link to some of the skills training that I know CIPS does. Faye, in your experience, are there early warning signs to catch potential supplier or commercial disputes before they escalate?
Absolutely. So I always say that disputes don't arrive out of nowhere. They often build. So in terms of early warning signals, there are things like performance slippage. So what does that mean? Delivery times are starting to stretch. Quality metrics are dipping. That is an early warning sign. Then you have communication breakdowns. So Kurt has talked about communication, but you may see things such as slower response times or avoidance of certain topics in dialogue, or a more formal tone coming into your exchanges that suggests the relationship is shifting. This is another example of an early warning sign. And then you get deep into the delivery. So I call it repeated exceptions. So you may find that there are frequent requests for change, or these one-off requests that actually become patterns. And leading from that, you then can have misalignment of outcomes. So I always talk about goals. Do you understand your goals for the relationship, and how have you framed those and how have you communicated those? But sometimes you find that goals start to drift. They start to drift further apart, and there's no discussion around that. So I always say goals don't have to align, because organizations will have different priorities, but they have to be understood. You have to be transparent. And when they start to shift and move and there's no communication, that can be a sign that there is a dispute coming on the horizon. So I think the trick is to understand that these are moments for intervention. It's important to spot these so that you can do something about it. Whereas often it's just seen as background noise. Oh, this is just part and parcel. And that's where you often miss the trick, and then things start to escalate without you recognizing.
Yeah, really interesting. Kurt, we talked last time about the fact that unfortunately disputes do occur no matter how many times you spot these early warning signs, particularly when macro changes are happening. A decision is taken by somewhere in the world to change a tariff policy, for example, and this impacts the procurement and supply relationship somewhere else. So what would be your advice? Any toolkits, any methods for approaching disputes, or particularly for preparing for them? I don't know if it's the same as preparing for a negotiation or whether it's slightly different, but what's your advice for procurement and supply professionals in managing disputes when they do occur?
You're absolutely right. Disputes will happen, and the majority of the time they happen is because we're not proactively managing the actual relationship. We end up being reactive, and that's where we end up in a dispute. But any dispute is a negotiation, and we're having to go back and realign the roles and responsibilities, the expectations of both parties within the contract. And the clear thing that, whenever people say to me and say, okay, well, there's dispute, what we're going to do. And then I say, the first thing we need is you need to work out the same as a negotiation. What is your BATNA? What's your walk away point if this doesn't happen? And if it's a sole source, an OEM, you've got no walk away point because it's now going to affect your business. So we have to understand the impact of where we want to take this dispute. But the majority of the time, data is the critical element. If we've got data to back up our dispute, there is no argument. People won't argue about facts and data as long as it's accurate. And you're going to speak about this in the next podcast, but that's where AI is going to be a godsend for us with regard into accurate information. So for me, root cause, what is the impact, the potential impact with regard into if the relationship breaks down to the business? Is it going to risk the supply, our reputation, our brand? What options are available to us? But sit round, work out a get well plan on how both parties have to change, because we tend to blame rather than actually look at the problem.
You mentioned there, if this is an OEM, a critical manufacturer, you don't have another supply option. Any additional advice for those, more difficult conversations, I suppose?
You always have to have an option, a back out with regards to that. And if the contract is going through frustration with the supplier and you're constantly getting problems and everything else, well, you need to look at an alternative, and whether it's a reduction with regard to your specification or an alternative supply, etc. And this is commonplace within the automotive industry and pharma, is that we don't have just one source. Because if we get to the situation of the dispute goes even further and then our legal colleagues get involved, it's the last thing you want to do in a dispute. Because, as Faye said, the only people that win there are the legal team, and the business really suffers. So the key thing for me is when you go into a contract, you're going into that contract, both parties based upon mutual trust and respect. And the reason the contract's gone into frustration and breaking down is because that trust and respect is broken. And where and why did it break? And it's not personal. This is a business process. But you must think of your supply chain and think of the risk. And if you're using Kreljit with regard into the impact and the risk to the business, and you pick one supplier, a sole supplier, or even a single supplier, which has the same complexity, you've got a risk. And therefore, the relationship is absolutely paramount. If it's a multiple supplier, you haven't got a risk. You can go and buy from another shop. But relationship is absolutely vital.
Faye, you've obviously got significant experience in managing these disputes and conflicts. So what have you learned from your experiences? If I paint a picture here, say there's been an ongoing dispute for a couple of months now, you've got an upcoming supplier meeting with a supplier to talk through that kind of contractual dispute or conflict. How would you prepare? What would be your advice for a procurement practitioner listening?
I'll just start back more broadly about some of my key learnings from working in this space. And the first thing is that disputes get more complex over time. And that's really important, because the quicker you reach a resolution, the easier it is to come to some kind of consensus. Over time, views shift, new issues fall into the mix. So time is really, really important. And the other piece is that often the root cause of disputes are actually quite simple. You can almost categorize them. So it's things like ambiguities in the contract terms, poorly defined scopes of work, misinterpretation of what elements of the contract actually mean. And then, as Kurt has said, if you overlay that with fractured relationships or a lack of trust, that is when you get issues. So just starting from the things you can focus on to get right, first of all. But if you do find yourself in a dispute, the first piece of advice will be mindset. So I always say that conflict or a dispute is not a sign of failure. Conflict is a natural part of relationships. Kurt's talked about marriages, but just in general, you get conflict. And if you are managing complex commercial relationships, complex contracts, it is reasonable that at some point there may be a dispute. So I always talk about mindset first, that it's not a failure of the person. It doesn't mean anyone's done a bad job. And if that mindset is aligned, you can go into it in a different lens. And that links to then separating the person from the problem, or the emotion from what is a business dealing, as Kurt has said. So don't personalize what has happened. Frame it as a shared challenge within the relationship rather than a battle, a shared challenge that you have to work together to resolve, to find a solution for, because the relationship belongs to both parties. The second tip would be, again, anchor in the evidence. And that is much easier if you have the right mindset and you've recognized this as a business relationship. So the facts, the data, the contract, which you shouldn't just be taking out when the dispute happens, use those to enable more constructive dialogue, not as weapons, but again, forward looking to the solution and to support the relationship and overcoming the hurdle together. And finally, the atmosphere, shaping the right atmosphere. So how a meeting opens matters. Language that you use, it matters. Even if the person across the table from you is hostile or maybe using inflammatory language, maintaining your composure can actually shift the course of that dialogue. So tone, really important. That atmosphere can help you get to a better end goal. So kind of working through issues, it's not always about immediate solutions. Sometimes it may take time, but you want to limit that time so that you don't allow issues to escalate. And those three things I mentioned, I think, are really important and practical tips that people can use when they go into a negotiation or a meeting to try and resolve a dispute.
Kurt, anything you'd add to that in terms of the skills training that maybe CIPS do? Is there anything that you would say is, elements to prioritize, or areas where procurement maybe sometimes lack the capability and need to kind of upskill themselves in to manage things like conflict?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you're going to put the link to the various courses that we have with regarding to contracts, SRM, negotiation. But it really was a great shout by Faye with regarding to the soft skills. And we need to be a bit more understand the business. It's not a process in just procurement and everything else. It's the wider business. And when I teach and other trainers teach with regarding to negotiation and dispute resolution, is that the key word that we want them to remember is the word we. Because it might be that they've got the problem, but we've got a problem. It's a supply problem. It is a problem for both parties, because if they can't supply, or there's the dispute broken down with the frustration of the contract, we've all got a problem. And Faye was absolutely right. The atmosphere and where you sit and everything else, get rid of this sterile environment. My team, go for a coffee, sit on a settee and have a conversation and say, we've got a problem. How can we resolve this problem? Rather than the blame game. And a lot of the times when young professionals used to come in my office and go, that's it, the supplier's done this and everything else, I used to tell them, look in the mirror and tell me you've not caused this problem. Has the business, have we done something, changed our payment terms? That's the classic one where we frustrate a contract. Or have we changed the demand? Are we asking for something quicker than they can make? What have we done? And some of the times, and I have to say majority of the times, they look at me and go, well, yeah, we did, but they should have reacted. Well, no, they can't, because as the contract and as per what they can do, they can't. And it comes down to empathy. And our biggest skill that we have to have is we have to listen, okay? And then make an informed judgment. We rush too much into the blame game.
Yeah, listening actually is, one of those things that is often much harder to do than I think people give it credit for, because people often come into a meeting with their own agenda or their own perspective, right? And you've got to kind of take yourself away from that to allow yourself to listen and then bring those two things together if you can. Just a final point, and we're going to talk more about this in episode 3, but Kurt, do you think technology has a role to play in all of this as well? Obviously, the human is incredibly important, and the human elements and the soft skills that we've talked about are vital, and procurement and supply are still going to need those. But do you think technology is going to play an increasing role in supporting procurement to overcome conflict easier?
100%. And I'm sure the people listening to this would echo that their master data within their system is not accurate, and they're relying on that to make informed decisions, and that might be needed within a dispute. We need good data. We rely heavily on data. And the great thing, AI coming in, it's also going to give us options that we haven't thought of before, and possible solutions. But we can't argue against accurate data, neither can the supplier. If there's accurate data, we can't argue about it. We are very logical people in procurement and supply chain, and we rely on data. But AI is going to give us that other edge, and both parties of saying, well, what about these other options? Have we thought about these other options that we can do? And it will also help us identify risks within the contract and within the supply. When we look, and I do lots of training around the world, you're absolutely right. What happens is they get the contract, they put it in the filing cabinet, they're more reactive than proactive, and AI will be a proactive system sat in the back, making sure that the delivery on time, the KPIs, the critical success factors, market intelligence, the commodity prices which are changing, tariffs that are coming in, anything that can have a direct influence on the execution and delivery of the contract. And that's what we need. We need information, and accurate information, to make informed decisions. It won't replace the human being. It won't replace the procurement and supply chain professional, because negotiation is all about building relationships. AI is going to give us that virtual contract administrator, which means that the contract managers can actually do their role, which is 80% all about relationship management. So I'm really excited of the future, and really excited that AI is coming in.
Yeah, a passionate pitch there for AI and for the role of technology, absolutely. And we'll absolutely be asking you those questions, Faye, around AI's role in contract management, AI's role in looking for those red flags in episode 3. So we'll hear more about that from you and a member of your team who's kind of an expert on this. But Faye, as a sort of final point for this episode, can you give us a little bit of a teaser as to your elevator pitch for how AI and tech is going to play a role in conflict management in the future?
The overall comment will be AI will be invaluable as a co-pilot, I always say, but specifically for resolution, we see technology, particularly our technology, as a pulse monitor of commercial relationships. So tracking that relationship in real time, doing the bits that prevent issues from occurring and escalating, but also guiding people towards constructive actions. And the key word is people. It's not doing it independently, but it's supporting individuals to get those good outcomes. It doesn't replace humans, but it supports that human judgment to make resolution faster, fairer, more consistent.
Thank you very much. And look, we'll hear more from you and Kazia, your colleague, on episode 3, all about the role that AI is playing, and also paint a little bit of a picture, I think, around what this actually looks like and what the practicalities are for procurement in using this tech and using AI in the right way, and ensuring that it's fair and consistent with all those ethical considerations that go with it as well. But thank you very much, Faye. Thank you very much, Kurt. Really, really appreciate your time in joining us for episode 2 of this CIPS Futures Supply Disputes mini-series. So thank you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that's all for episode 2 of this Navigating Supplier Disputes mini-series. Thanks for joining us. Really hope you enjoyed listening to that. I know I did. There is a link in the episode description to the report that we mentioned in the episode, which details the findings from the recent CIPS resolution survey on this very subject. We talked in lots of detail about this on episode 1 as well, but do take a look at the report if you get a chance. That's it from this episode though. Thank you to CIPS official knowledge partners Resolution for partnering with us on this mini-series, and we'll see you next time.